What's happening, everybody? Welcome to Off the Top Rope, Off the Mic Sports Network. So, AEW Dynamite, another largely uneventful show from Philadelphia in the 2300 Arena. A lot of nothing happened on this show. We kind of know most of what's going to happen at All Out, but listen, you're 10 days away from a pay-per-view. Considering all the bad publicity that WWE is getting, you would think there would be more urgency on this show. And there wasn't. And the biggest news breaking thing, which I'm saying sheepishly because you could see this coming from a fucking mile away, unless you were like dumb or stupid. Daniel Garcia turns heel and joins the Death Riders and aligns himself with Jon Moxley. But this had been hinted for multiple weeks. You saw him lose the match in Collision, and basically he was saying, yeah, maybe it's not good enough anymore. They didn't even wait. Like they could have easily had this done, like, potentially in the coffin match at All Out, but they do it tonight on Dynamite in the closing moments of the show. Daniel Garcia botches his turn with basically, he shows up in the hoodie, then he tries to do the curb stomp to the chair, misses the chair completely. They have to do it again, and I swear to God, this guy looked so disinterested. And maybe some people will say, man, he looks heartless. Well, from a facial expression, it's like, there's a difference between, aggression and, being a sourpuss, like, he didn't feel like a Death Rider. Let's put it that way. And that's not saying much because the Death Riders suck. But at least the Death Riders, there is some level of, whether it's kind of hammed up and kind of goofy and stupid and just over the top and unnecessary. Like, at least with the Death Riders, there seems to be some level of aggression. With Daniel Garcia, it seemed like almost like he was very passive in what he was doing. And that, in addition to the fact that since Daniel Garcia at this time last year returned to attack MJF and then ultimately lost to MJF, only for him to help write off MJF. And then this Daniel Garcia babyface push just did not work. He won the TNT title. It was a very just pedestrian and very lackadaisical and very uninteresting reign. And sadly, listen, I like Daniel Garcia's wrestling. I think he is a very talented young man from a technical perspective in the ring. This guy is as plain and ordinary as vanilla ice cream. This guy has zero personality. So it's almost fitting that he's joining the Death Riders because there's really not a lot of personality to these guys anyway. That being said, them adding him to the Death Riders, what does this accomplish? Nobody wants to see the Death Riders anymore. Like, this faction should have disbanded after Jon Moxley lost the world title to Hangman. And then he lost a follow-up match. So you've got, Pac hasn't been there, so maybe he's effectively taking Pac's spot. They tried doing it with Gabe Kidd, but listen, I don't give a shit. And if that's your biggest storyline going into this show that you're rivaling against WWE, that being said, WWE has felt completely and utterly soulless for really most of the year. I understand that they're limited on people, but basically what this tells me is they have zero faith in Daniel Garcia. They did everything they could to keep him away from WWE. And hey, 1 year into this massive babyface push that he's supposed to have, coming off of, the whole thing with MJF, and nothing happened. He got a TNT title win over, Jack Perry in a match that nobody remembers. He loses it unceremoniously to Adam Cole. He's fighting for that for years, for weeks and months on end, and yet now here we are in the closing moments of Dynamite, and he's attacking Darby Allin, and then he can't even get like one of his big spots correct, and they have to do it again. And the facial expressions, it looked like this guy did not want to be there. He looked like a guy who regrets his decision to stay in AEW. He looks like a guy who has regretted his decision. And that being said, listen, like I said, God bless Daniel Garcia, but there's a reason why, there's a ceiling with this guy. When you're a talented wrestler and you have no personality, there's only so far that you can take you. And when you're in a wrestling company, like where the best wrestle, and you're not even like, listen, he's a fine wrestler, but I wouldn't say he's like anything like exceptional, like on the level of like a Bryan Danielson or like a Kenny Omega or any of these, like, like Will Ospreay or some of these other guys. Like he's fine. And from a technical perspective, like I said, guy wrestles decently. But when you don't have a personality to separate yourself from anybody in that place, where it's basically just a bunch of dudes who do the same shit and you don't do flips, you're not going to stand out. So I guess him joining the Death Riders is what was needed. But again, you kind of telegraphed it for a couple of weeks and, he got some heat. But again, why am I supposed to care? Why am I supposed to care about this? The guy is just ordinary. There's nothing special about him. He's all right, but he's joining a faction that I've had zero interest in for close to a year. He attacks Darby Allin leading into the match, the coffin match at All Out. So is Jon Moxley going to get written off of television with this? Because listen, if you're going to go into this match, it tells me that I think they're setting up for potentially Darby to win and ultimately, write off people off of television. But like I said, if you're adding another member of the Death Riders, then that tells me that they're thinking that they have more mileage out of this stable or this group. And to me, this group has been dead for a long time. They've been sinking this product and they've been sinking this television show for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and months. And now we're at a year. Like somebody told me they was talking about the whole angle that set this whole thing up with the plastic bag thing. And, Brian, and what was interesting about this is Bryan Danielson was, sitting at ringside while this was all going on. And like, we didn't even really play much. Well, I mean, Brian was actually saying, man, Danny, what are you doing? The other part of this that, was a little bit odd was, no Daddy Magic, who's been like the right-hand man of Danny for years, questioning what the hell he's doing. Maybe they're saving this for Collision or saving this for next week, but it's like, that's your go-home angle 10 days into a pay-per-view. Your world champion opened up the show, setting up a predictable match with Kyle Fletcher. We know how that's going to go. The women on this show, you had a bunch of indie-rific mud show spots in the Philly street fight between, Sky Blue and Tony Storm. And the most noteworthy thing from that match was, hey, there was mouse traps and there was cheese involved. And then Tony Storm had her lady bits stapled gunned. Cool. Okay. Why are we having the women's world champion do that 10 days before a title defense? Again, this show just feels so directionless. Like it feels like they're going through the motions. Like wrestling in general in 2025 has been really just, basic and ordinary and, nothing exciting. And AEW, the biggest problem with them is like they could be doing so much better if they at least tried. And, you've got potential to show off, hey, that you're the alternative to WWE. But you're so dead set in doing things a certain way that you don't want to deviate from that and potentially try to, market to a younger audience, that you're more affordable and that, you have stars that WWE doesn't want. And yet here we are, you've got the same shit that they've been doing the entire year, the same shit that you've been doing for 3 years. And then your biggest moment, the entire show, is that you've got a $500,000 10-man tag, which is basically the two biggest tropes of Tony Khan. And it's just laughable to me at this point that they keep doing that. The Young Bucks win their money, which was immediately forgotten because we went right into the closing angle, which is, Daniel Garcia, a guy that really nobody gives a shit about, joining a group that nobody gives a shit about. When that's the state of your creative, that's not good. So again, I say this week in and week out, this place is creatively bankrupt. That being said, WWE's not much better. But my God, man, like at least they're like, hey, AJ Lee's back and, they're kind of sticking to like, yeah, they've got bad creative, but at least there's like, some exciting things going on there. There's nothing exciting going on AEW. Come on. What are we doing? So, Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. I'll have more coming here on the channel. Appreciate it. I'll see you guys. Bye-bye.